Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hi, everyone. All right, I'm just going to be really honest with you guys. Today is a rough one. It's Friday, the 30th of January, 2026. You guys all know I try not to come on here and inflame and upset you, but it's been a really rough morning with a few bright spots, which we'll touch upon. So we found out this morning that Don Lemon, the former CNN anchor, now independent journalist, was arrested last night in Los Angeles while covering the Grammys. For his journalistic work covering a protest at a church in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that is affiliated with ICE, where a deputy director of ICE in that region is a pastor, and where that church actually has been apparently, according to some reporting, used as a staging ground for ICE in the St. Paul area. The footage of Don Lemon inside that church when that protest was taking place is basic journalism. He's interviewing people who are present. He is not participating in the protest. He's acting as a journalist. And I will just say that this arrest, without question, violates the First Amendment of the Constitution. There's some additional context to this that people should be aware of. Breaking about a half an hour ago is news that federal prosecutors in the U.S. attorney's offices in both Minnesota and in Los Angeles refused to participate in the demand from Pam Bondi to prosecute Don Lemon. And in fact, threats have been made by the U.S. attorney's office in Minneapolis that they will literally empty the office and every U.S. attorney will quit, leaving the Department of Justice without any federal prosecutors whatsoever for Minnesota. So there is obviously a bit of a revolt happening amongst the lifers at the DOJ, and particularly against Harmeet Dillon, who is currently the head of the DOJ Civil Rights Division. More on how that intersects in a minute, in refusing to do this. Furthermore, earlier this week, a magistrate judge refused to sign off on an arrest warrant for Don Lemon under these charges and found that there was no basis to arrest him. Now, this morning, Pam Bondi has come out on Twitter and said that Don Lemon and 3 other people were arrested at her instructions. That has raised questions about whether or not there was even like a legitimate arrest warrant. Okay. The 3 other people who have been arrested, and again, this is really awful shit. I just have to be honest with all of you. All 4 of the people arrested in this particular run are Black folks. That is not by accident. One of them is a Black local journalist in St. Paul by the name of Georgia Fort. Federal agents descended on her house early this morning. There is now footage of the moment when they arrived. And then she subsequently live streamed what was happening on her Facebook Live before she was arrested. There were children in her house. They surrounded her house back and front with federal agents. They had rows of Black SUVs in her cul-de-sac. And they claimed that they had a grand jury indictment for her arrest, similarly for covering this church protest. In addition to that, 2 arrest warrants were apparently executed, if warrants even exist. Again, this is a huge question. 2 other folks were arrested. They are both local Black politicians. One of whom is currently a candidate for the state Senate in Minnesota from St. Paul. The other is a currently serving elected official who also happens to be the founder of the Minnesota chapter of Black Lives Matter. This is exactly what it looks like. I just have to point exactly what it looks like. And then the White House had the white supremacist nerve to post a photograph of Don Lemon on Truth Social and on X with a chains emoji, literal chains. Reminder, this is a Black American journalist. And the words, "When life gives you lemons, you put them in chains." That apparently is the message out of the White House. So I want to mention just a couple quick things about this from a legal standpoint so that people understand exactly where this is coming from. The charges against, and we haven't seen the charging documents yet, so I want to be really clear about this. We have not seen draft indictments. We don't know whether or not warrants actually exist, but we know that Don Lemon has been charged under two things. One is the FACE Act, and the other is a charge of conspiracy to deprive rights. Now, just hold on for a second, take a deep breath, because you're going to recognize in the same way I do that irony has been smashed with a sledgehammer through this action. The FACE Act is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. It was put into law to protect abortion clinics. And at the time that it was signed into law, Republicans managed to get one concession out of the passage of this act, which was that it could also apply to churches. So they are using the FACE Act, which is designed to protect abortion providers and people procuring abortion medical care rather, to prosecute a journalist for covering a protest inside a church. In addition to that, they have alleged conspiracy to deprive rights, which is also known as, wait for it, the KKK Act. The KKK Act was an act that was put into place after the Civil War that was designed to stop the KKK from interfering with the rights of Black Americans. And it has been used historically against white supremacist entities that have been trying to stop things like desegregation. So against a Black, gay American journalist, they have weaponized the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act and the KKK Act. And this has gone so far now that white MAGA people on Twitter this morning are referring to Don Lemon as a modern day Klansman. Again, irony has been beaten to death with a sledgehammer. Okay. This is really bad. And I also have to point out that, per se violations of the First Amendment. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of the press. It guarantees freedom of the right to protest. It guarantees freedom of the right to petition your government for change. Okay. And there is nothing in the conduct, even in the conduct of the protesters, by the way. They didn't block the entrance to this church. They just went into it. And they were not interfering with the ability of the church to be a church. So all of this is at this point despicable. Like, I don't even really know that I have the words for it. It's also, by the way, an immediate basis for the impeachment of Pam Bondi, because she's already claimed this as having been done at her instruction. And it is a direct violation of the Constitution. No question, per se, not any topic of debate. And so one thing that I want to encourage people to do here today, because, I'm always like wanting people to kind of like take action, is you need to call your senators. And there's a number of things you're going to need to call your senators about today. We're going to talk about the budget deal in a minute. But one of them is to demand the impeachment of Pam Bondi for this. Demand action. Like, there's a lot of folks out there right now this morning, our elected officials, who are making like pithy commentary about this, like Cory Booker, but not indicating that they're actually going to do anything about it. All right. And so, this is something that requires our immediate response. And also, because I just want to point this out, really requires an understanding of the risks that independent journalists, and particularly independent journalists of color, are taking right now to document what's happening in Minneapolis and around the country. Don Lemon is one thing. He had the money to hire Abby Lowell, who, by the way, is an incredibly famous lawyer who has represented Jared and Ivanka in the past, among other people. Abby Lowell is his attorney, and Abby Lowell's statement is how we actually learned that Don Lemon had been arrested. But people like Georgia Fort, right? Independent journalists, people like, state senators in Minnesota do not have millions of dollars to pay a retainer to famous attorneys. And so I want folks to be very thoughtful right now about where you're directing your money. Okay. And I'm going to say this particularly. Okay. The people who have 5 million followers on YouTube do not need you to raise money for them to hire a lawyer. Okay. The people who need your financial support right now are independent journalists with small audiences who are out there risking their lives to document what ICE is doing in the street. Okay. So, and I'm going to issue another word of warning here. We've already had one instance in the past week or so where one of these people with a huge number of followers on YouTube started a despicable GoFundMe to maximize on his own profile in order to draw attention to himself while the parents of Alex Preddy were grieving, without asking their permission, without getting their consent, without having any relationship to that family. Be very, very cautious about GoFundMes that you may see at this time on behalf of the people who have been arrested. If they have not been started by a family member or a friend, you should ask questions about the motivations behind the people who are actually starting those GoFundMes, okay? Now, this brings me to one issue that I just want to talk about today, all right? Because we have to have a check yourself moment at times like this, okay? Because one of the things that actions like this are designed to do is to terrify the general public, all right? To scare people into silence, to make us all afraid that nobody is safe and nobody has freedom, okay? And I really have to correct that, all right? This is a moment where if you happen to be a person with the same skin shade, close proximity to mine, if you are a white person right now, you are not in the direct target of this administration unless you are showing, as we have discussed here in the last couple of days, class or racial solidarity with people who are under threat. That's Renee Good and Alex Preddy, okay? If you are a white person, you have more of an obligation to stand up right now than anyone else. And you also have an obligation to recognize that the threats that are being perpetrated against people of color in this country right now are very different from the threats that exist against people who look like me, all right? I want people to really be mindful when they say things like no one is safe or we don't have freedom anymore about who you are and what you look like when you say things like that, okay? Because they're not mass rounding up white people on the streets of Minneapolis unless they are showing racial and class solidarity. They're not stopping white drivers in the middle of the street and smashing out their windows and taking them and leaving their 1-month-old infants in the car, which is what happened to a black man in Minneapolis 2 days ago, okay? You have to really think before you say things like that, because the other thing that is incredibly dangerous right now about this moment, and this is exactly what they want white people to do, is to be terrified into not taking action in solidarity with people who are under direct threat. So my request right now to all of the white folks in the audience, if you have not yet done this, is that you go find, like pretty much immediately, a training in your area on bystander intervention, on mutual aid, or on some form of rapid response, okay? Because what shuts this shit down, the thing that actually has got them so scared that they are elevating to the level of arresting journalists, is that they know that when people who look like us, like me, right? People who are white are out there videotaping what they're doing. And when journalists who have a First Amendment right are out there videotaping what they're doing, there is no question of their violence, their crimes against humanity, their crimes, period. Okay? So it is absolutely necessary that folks with privilege use it right now. Like maybe more necessary than it's been in this country in a very long time. And of course, we all have to like do our own risk assessment. Okay. So I want to make this clear. You know, if you are trans, if you have family members who are immigrants, if you are somebody who has a child who is brown or black, your assessment as a white person may be different. But I got to tell you, I think that there is very little excuse right now for white folks to not take action. To the point that I'm like really fed up and frustrated with people like white folks who come across my feed who are like, nothing's working, everything's failing, Trump's winning. Horse shit. Get your ass in a room with people who are fighting back, and you will have a different view of what's taking place right now. The people of Minneapolis, apart from anything else, deserve our work in furtherance of what they're doing. 8 weeks of this occupation. Everyday people who have never done anything in their lives to step up and activate or be political or organize for their neighbors are literally saving people's lives and stopping ICE from kidnapping people on a minute-by-minute basis. Like, get in formation. That's my my message for today. All right. Couple other things we have to talk about, okay? The budget deal related to last night. I want everybody to be really clear on what happened. So after the initial budget deal that would have included additional funding for DHS was voted down yesterday afternoon, a secondary deal was reached last night. And what this deal does is it continues to fund the government, but it has only a 2-week funding of DHS. And that means that in 2 weeks, the Republicans have no leverage left because the rest of the government, will be funded. And the question is whether or not DHS's funding will be cut off entirely. Now, that does not mean that the Democrats are doing the right thing here. Okay. So Schumer's got like this ridiculous proposal floating around that, like, ICE should not wear masks and they should have to wear body cameras and there shouldn't be roving patrols and they have to have warrants and, that there should be an enforceable code of conduct and that they shouldn't be allowed to deport American citizens, which, by the way, they are not allowed to do anyway. None of this will work. Okay. I just have to point this out. The people who murdered Alex Preddy were wearing body cameras. The unmasking doesn't. Greg Bovino is not stomping around Minneapolis before his termination with a mask on his face. These people don't care. They are not reformable. You think an enforceable code of conduct is going to be something that like executioners in the middle of a sidewalk are going to pay attention to? Like, are you joking? So the message has to be right now to the senators who represent us that it is no funding for DHS, full stop. Like, that's it. Shut it off. Like, we're done. And, that is a message that can be conveyed in your phone calls. You should be calling like every single day right now. We have 2 weeks to get this done. Okay. This is an opportunity to truly end this reign of terror if we only have our leaders be brave enough to do it. And I do have to point out that yesterday, when the funding bill was voted down, there were 8 Republicans, 7 plus John Thune, who changed his vote from yes to no so that he could bring a motion to the floor again. But there were 7 senators on the Republican side who would not vote for the bill. Now, they are a really weird mix. It's like Mike Lee and Tommy Tuberville and Rick Scott. It's a really strange mix of people. But on the other hand, it's a sign that the coalition isn't holding together, right? Rand Paul has been very vocal about the fact that he doesn't think that ICE deserves more funding in this moment. So we have to continue to try to build this coalition that's going to shut the government down and stop funding of DHS. Like, it's critically important right now. So please continue to make your voices heard. I'm just going to say this as well, okay? Just speaking of the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul and Minnesota generally, there have been some things that have crossed my feed in the last day that have been really upsetting to me. And again, it is very much this doom saying, or like, I call and it never makes a difference, right? I'm doing this, but nobody listens, right? I just have to point out, like, if you don't believe that your actions as an individual and in coalition can move mountains, you just have to look at Minneapolis. Like, seriously, learn something from what these people have done. Okay. There is enormous power in the work of individuals in coalition right now that actually could stop enormous levels of harm. And like I said yesterday, I've said this to people in the own communities, in our trainings, with the people that we support who are running huge social justice initiatives right now. Saving one life is worth it. Stopping one kidnapping is worth it, right? All hope is absolutely not lost. Quite the contrary. And if you are in the room with people who are doing this work, you know that. So you absolutely have to keep making your voice heard. And more than that, you have to organize where you live, because this is happening everywhere to lesser or greater degrees. Okay. And by the way, if you've already been trained, volunteer to support a training. They need help. Every single training is sold out right now. There's overflow rooms everywhere. People are desperate to get trained in how to defend their neighbors. Thank the gods, right? So, do your part for that. All right. And we'll see where we are in 2 weeks, but please keep making your phone calls. Okay. Couple other things that we have to talk about. This morning, Trump nominated Kevin Warsh to be the new Fed chairman after Jerome Powell. Okay. So I just have to point out, this is not a done deal. Kevin Warsh has to be voted up by the Senate. And on top of that, there is kind of some procedural means by which Jerome Powell might be able to stay on. But Kevin Warsh, in case people don't know this, is the son of Ron Lauder, who is of Estee Lauder fame, who is an enormous Trump donor. And so this appears to be another sort of like nepotistic thing. And there are a lot of questions about whether or not Kevin Warsh is actually like qualified for the job. So that one we're going to have to pay attention to as it moves through the Senate. Okay. Yesterday, Trump sued the IRS for $10 billion. There's not much, and purportedly because they released his tax returns, which of course they didn't actually release them in full. And again, like anything that was leaked did not come out through like traditional IRS channels. This whole thing looks like a grift. Like, I'm just going to say that to everybody. Essentially what, let me just set the stage here. He is suing a department of his own executive branch in a case that will be defended by his own DOJ for $10 billion of taxpayer money, which presumably will eventually leverage a settlement, which will result in the president getting paid out of the US Treasury with taxpayer dollars. It's deeply offensive. We're going to have to see what happens to this in a court of law. But again, you know, like another level of corruption and grift. Okay. Somebody asked me to talk about the federal overreach effort. So there is a new effort. I mentioned this actually earlier in the week, but now it has been formalized. There's a new effort by local prosecutors to band together to hold ICE accountable. This appears to be being led by Larry Krasner, who of course is a very progressive DA in Philadelphia, along with local prosecutors in other areas who are determined to apply state law to hold ICE accountable to those laws in the way that they're operating inside their given state. Yes, the name of this thing is like FAFO, whatever, you know, like the thing that I am interested to see is like, are they actually going to start arresting and prosecuting ICE officers? That has not happened yet. It looks like a good, solid, coordinated effort. I'm a big fan of Larry Krasner. I don't doubt that they're going to make an effort in some direction, but what this looks like and whether or not there will then be an attempt at federal intervention into these cases is something that has yet to be proven. All right. So there is organizing happening, of course, between Democratic governors in the Democratic Governors Association, and now with Democratic and progressive prosecutors. I will also just mention, because it's very important to say this, Mikey Sherrill yesterday here in New Jersey announced that she is setting up a database where people who have photographed ICE can send the videos in for storage for future prosecutions. This is an issue, by the way, that lawyers who are working on like what comes after this have been talking about. Like, how do you preserve a chain of evidence for a future Nuremberg style trial? And Mikey Sherrill is way ahead of everybody on this. It's like really good news. And that is for New Jersey. Hopefully there will be other folks, you know, in other states doing the same. Okay. Okay. Breaking news this morning in the Luigi Mangione case. This one's really going to piss off Trump. So a federal judge has dismissed all charges against Luigi Mangione except a stalking charge. That means that Luigi Mangione will not face the death penalty. And the charges of murder, first-degree murder that were against him, and the gun charge have been dropped. Now, there are still state charges pending against him in New York State, but New York State doesn't have the death penalty. And the federal stalking charge that is against him does carry a potential term of life in prison. So the interesting thing that we're going to get to see now is whether or not jury nullification plays a role in Luigi Mangione's trials. For those who don't know, jury nullification is what happened in the O.J. Simpson case, where a jury is presented with an enormous amount of evidence that shows the defendant's guilt, and they decide to ignore it and acquit anyway. Okay, it's essentially a determination by the jury that for some other reason they're not going to convict. So Luigi Mangione will live out his life, probably behind bars, but he will not be put to death by the state. And you all know I am a like vociferous opponent of the death penalty. Anytime the death penalty is not applied, anytime there is a limit on the state's ability to take a life, I'm in favor of it. But it's a very big development in that case, a huge win, frankly, for his attorneys. So we'll see what happens next, but you know, only one federal count remains, and that's for stalking. The remainder will be under state charges, which of course include murder in New York State. Okay, there was a question today about how do we take local general strikes and make them national. I've had to say this a lot here, but I'm going to answer the question again because it keeps coming up. Okay, a general strike in the United States of America is going to be virtually impossible to accomplish because unlike other nations, we have some problems. Okay. The first is that we have no significant laws that protect people's employment. Okay. We also have health insurance that is tied to employment in most instances. And that means that if people don't show up for work for days at a time, they will be fired and they will lose their health insurance. Okay. We also have geographic constraints. General strikes are much easier to execute in a like European nation that is the size of like Texas. They're not even that big. Let's say the size of Pennsylvania, than it is to execute a general strike nationwide here in the US. And I just want to say a couple of things. I have not said this before, so I'm just going to say a couple other things here about general strikes in general. Okay. What it takes to organize a mass mobilization, and again, many of you know that I did this. I was part of an organizing team for an 800-city mass mobilization against Trump in 2019. is an enormous amount of work, right? And that's for like an event that takes place over one day, okay? In order to successfully carry out a nationwide general strike, you will need a strike fund of millions and millions and millions of dollars to support people who lose their jobs or can't pay their rent, right? This is part of what happened in Minneapolis, by the way. They created rent funds for people who couldn't leave the house or go to work, okay? We will need to have a degree of organizing that this country has never seen to be able to pull off a general strike. And I think a lot of people don't understand what it takes to do things like this, right? You need permits, you need porta potties, you need a willingness to do communications to millions of people nationwide. Even if it's just a general strike where people stay home and don't shop, you got to think about the impact of that to people who have like kids, right? Or aging parents that they're taking care of, who need medicine, who need food, right? Like people, one of the things that's really bothering me right now about this whole discourse around a general strike is that like people are like general strike, and then they don't think about like what it actually means on the ground to carry it out, okay? So my thought about this, because, you know, the general strike in Minneapolis was successful only because businesses got involved, right? Businesses said, you can stay home this day. We're closing also. And then the state legislators in Minnesota got behind it and endorsed it, all right? It was a uniform effort by people who cared to shut down Minnesota for one day, all right? In order to pull this off on a nationwide level, you would have to have that kind of cooperation nationwide. And I just have news for you. If you think Amazon or Target or like, you know, Apple, right? Any company that has like already bent the knee to Trump is going to agree to this. You got another thing coming. People will lose their livelihoods, their health insurance, and potentially their lives if it's not run well. All right. So I just want people to start. This is one reason why I'm like, go local, like one of many reasons. You want to see change, organize your own community. There are ways to network with communities all over the country that are doing the same. And if there ever is a real potential for a general strike, you're going to want to be organized in your community anyway. All right. Like your local Indivisible chapter, your local Red, Wine, and Blue chapter, your local immigration rights organization, your local food pantry, right? That's the place where people who are doing the work of saving lives is happening right now. All right. But all these things of like, why isn't anybody organizing a general strike? That comes from a place of actual ignorance about what it takes to pull this off and why it is incredibly unlikely to happen in this country. So, you know, the idea that we would be able to ramp up to some kind of a national general strike, I think is like at this moment in time, pretty much impossible, like never say never. But the idea that we might be able to pull off like a day-long shutdown, right, is not impossible. And the only way that that's going to happen is by people organizing locally where they live to get involved. So that's really what needs to happen. Okay, final thought for today. I know that there has been a lot of panic and paranoia this week about elections. And I don't use that term paranoia lightly. I think a lot of it actually is paranoia. It's not legitimately founded in like real threat. And a lot of spinning out of like, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. There's going to be ice in front of every polling place and nobody's going to be able to vote. And he's going to steal the election in certain ways. Here's all the magical ways in which he can do these things that he has no authority to do. And, you know, here's what I just want to say about it. Okay. We are living through incredibly challenging times. Like real horrible things are happening on the ground day in and day out. Okay. And there's only two ways through this. Okay. The first way is to focus on remediating harm. How can you stop people from being murdered and kidnapped where you live? Okay. The only way you can do that is by getting involved. Okay. The second thing that we really have to do is not spin out into scenarios that are not happening in real time. All right. And let me just say why, because I got a lot of pushback about this on Blue Sky in the last couple of days by people who were like, I think we should take this seriously. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't sneer at it, but I mean, like, the thing about this is that like, if you are doing this thing of like, Trump's going to go and like steal like 6 different House election seats in various places around the country, and Elon Musk is going to magically use his satellites to steal data, when that's not how any of this works. And, like they're going to put ice in front of every single polling location when they don't have the manpower to do that. When you are doing that, okay, you are, first of all, engaging in hypervigilance, which is a trauma protection cycle, but you're also not focusing on like the real shit that is going on right now in real time that is taking and harming people's lives, all right? The way that we're going to get through this election is by organizing for the election, which, by the way, is going to be a lot easier to do if you are already organized on the ground, all right? And so what I want to just like plead with people to do today, okay, is rather than doing this thing of spinning out and theorizing and fantasizing, frankly, about what's going to happen in November, that you actually get in the room with people who are doing the work of trying to change things for the better, all right? It is a sanity protection mechanism. It is action that helps to counteract despair. And frankly, it's like the only way through. Like, so my two ways through are like, sorry, I know I said there were two. One way is to stop spinning out into fantasy. And the other way is to focus on reality right now and get involved. All right. Those two things need to happen right now. Okay. And yes, if you're worried about the election, there are things that you can do right now to make sure that elections are safe where you are. You can volunteer to be a poll worker. You can get trained to be a precinct captain. You can volunteer for voter protection work with a company, not a company, with an organization that's doing that work where you live. Okay. Counties have whole voter protection mechanisms, and you can volunteer to be a part of that. Okay. And by the way, let me just tell you something, because I know people who have been running voter protection in Florida for like years now. They train you in what to do if somebody shows up with a gun. They train you in how to make sure that voters are safe. You can be a part of that. Okay. That is a solution. All right. So the thing that we all have to really try not to do right now is to spin off into fantastical versions of despair, because the shit that's happening is bad enough and people need us. All right. So my plea, it's Friday. My plea today is to make your phone calls to the Senate, call your senators, demand the impeachment of Pam Bondi, demand no more funding for DHS. Simple, full stop. That's the end of it. And don't stop calling, by the way. And you could also, by the way, ask for their support of the impeachment of Kristi Noem, because articles of impeachment are already in play for her. And then in addition to that, please get involved locally where you live in some way. Like, even if you can only do like one shift at a food bank a month, right? You can do one evening of phone banking for a local candidate. We have primaries starting like literally in days. There's something that you can do everywhere. And you can go to mobilize.us, plug in your zip code and see what's happening and find a way to plug in and get involved. Everybody needs to do this, okay? And you will not be alone. Like, every single rapid response training that I'm aware of right now is sold out, standing room only, and has overflow rooms. Like, it's crazy. Okay. So please do your part. All right. For our Patreon subscribers, there will be a bonus broadcast this afternoon at 3:00. Reminder on scheduling. Next week, the broadcast goes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and our educational training videos move from Monday to Tuesday. So I will see you all back here Monday if you are not a Patreon subscriber. And if you want to see me this afternoon, please become a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. Remember to like this broadcast, give it a thumbs up. If you're listening on a podcasting channel, please subscribe and drop us a 5-star review, and stay safe, everyone. Man, it is a crazy day out there. I know Fridays in Trumpland kind of have your reputation. This one is sort of off the rails already. All right, everybody. I will see you later on today if you're our Patreon friends. Otherwise, I'll catch you all on Monday. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.